in a remote mountainous region of Britain called Grimvale, where the ancient forests of Yarnshire and fog-covered graveyards had stood silently for centuries. There was an old Victorian church beside a cemetery known as Blackthorn Graveyard. The cemetery belonged only to the local people, but one grave had always remained different, without any stone or name. Dr. Edward Harrington, a famous archaeologist from London, returned to Grimvale after the death of his father. His father, Sir Richard Harrington, had been buried in that very cemetery. In his will, only one sentence was written: "Never open my coffin and never bring it home." Edward ignored it, thinking it was merely the strange warning of an old man. But one stormy night, as thunder roared and rain crashed from the sky, the cemetery caretaker, old Mr. Hargreaves, knocked desperately on his door. "Sir, your father's grave has opened. The coffin is outside." Edward frowned. "What do you mean?" "The coffin, it came out on its own. The soil looks as if something pushed from inside." Edward rushed to the cemetery. In the wet mud stood an old black wooden coffin, partially open. It had no name on it, only a strange symbol, an inverted cross and a Latin phrase carved beneath it. "Qui tu noe?" "He is not resting." Hargreaves trembled. "Sir, this doesn't look like your father's coffin. The wood is different and the smell like something centuries old." Edward leaned closer. The coffin was empty, but on the pillow inside lay a long black strand of hair that looked disturbingly human. That same night, Edward brought the coffin to Harrington House, the old family manor. His childhood friend, Dr. James Thompson, a psychiatrist visiting from London, was there too. "Eddie, have you lost your mind?" James asked nervously. "Why would you bring a coffin home from a graveyard?" "I need answers, James," Edward replied. "Father was hiding something. This coffin is connected to him." Late that night, while the two sat in the library, a sound echoed from downstairs. "Knock, knock, knock," as if something inside the coffin was trying to open the lid. James laughed nervously. Probably the wind. But when they went to the basement where the coffin had been placed, the lid was slightly open. A freezing wind drifted from inside. The next morning, James's car brakes failed. The vehicle crashed near the graveyard forest, leaving him badly injured in the hospital. Back at the manor, Edward found a wet piece of paper beside his bed. Written on it were the words, "You invited me into your home. Now I am your guest." That night, the knocking returned, this time directly outside Edward's bedroom. "Knock, knock, knock," and muddy footprints stretched across the floor, made of the same wet soil from the cemetery. Edward did not sleep at all. He sat outside the basement door with his father's old shotgun in his hands while the rain continued outside. The next morning, he visited James in the hospital. James could barely speak. Doctors claimed there had been no mechanical fault in the car, as if something unseen had stopped the brakes from working normally. James weakly pulled Edward closer and whispered, "Eddie, bury it back. I saw her in a dream, a faceless woman dragging your father away." Edward returned to the manor with dread crushing his chest. The basement door was open by itself. The coffin now stood in the middle of the room, its lid half open. A strange odor filled the air, old soil, dead flowers, and something else like rotting flesh. Gathering his courage, Edward lifted the lid completely. Inside was an old diary. Not his father's. The leather had turned brown with age, and the pages were yellow. On the first page was written, "Lady Eleanor Blackthorn, 1879. Edward remembered the stories. Blackthorn Graveyard had once belonged to that family. Eleanor Blackthorn was said to have been a beautiful woman who was buried alive by her husband after she went insane. Inside the diary, one passage read, "I have seen them, the ones who live in darkness. They come in dreams. They offer your deepest desire, and in return, they take your soul. I wished for my husband's death, and they granted it." Edward continued reading when suddenly the basement lights went out. "Knock, knock, knock." This time the sound came directly from inside the coffin. He stepped backward and felt something brush against his foot. Looking down, he saw another strand of long black hair, wet, as though freshly cut from someone's head. Later that night, he read the final pages of the diary. "If you bring the coffin home, it becomes part of your bloodline. Every night, it steals one memory from you. When all your memories are gone, you will sleep inside it yourself. Edward slammed the diary shut. Then he realized something terrifying. He could no longer remember how his mother had died. Panicking, he rushed to the mirror. Dark circles had formed beneath his eyes. But the strangest thing was the necklace around his neck, an old locket he had never worn before. He opened it. Inside was a faded photograph of his mother, standing beside another woman whose face was nothing but darkness. The phone rang. It was the hospital. "Mr. Harrington, your friend James Thompson has died. Heart failure. But there's something strange. His body was covered in soil from the cemetery." Edward's hand shook violently. He slowly turned around. The coffin lid was now completely open, and inside, there was an empty space prepared as if someone had just made a bed for its next occupant. Edward tried desperately to shut the coffin, but the lid had become impossibly heavy. A freezing gust swept through the basement, extinguishing every candle. Knock, knock, knock. Now the sound echoed inside his skull, as though something trapped within his mind was clawing its way out. He ran upstairs and searched through his father's old files in the library. There he discovered a letter, written in 1998. "If you are reading this, then the coffin has returned. Edward, my son, I made a terrible mistake. Eleanor Blackthorn was not buried alive by her husband in 1879. She willingly sealed herself inside the coffin to escape an ancient curse known as the memory wearian. It feeds on memories while keeping its victims alive. Once you forget everything, you become part of the coffin forever." Edward's vision blurred. He tried to remember his mother's face, but every attempt ended the same way. Her features dissolved into a dark void. At 2 a.m, he entered his bedroom and froze. A woman sat on his bed. Long black hair, a white veil, and no face. She spoke softly, her voice sounding like earth falling into a grave. "You invited me home, Edward. Now you cannot send me away." Edward screamed, grabbed a shotgun, and fired. The blast hit her directly. But instead of blood, she smiled and vanished. Only old dirt stains remained on the wall. The following morning, Edward noticed white streaks in his hair. He was only 42 years old. He returned to the cemetery, but Mr. Hargreaves had disappeared. Inside the caretaker's cabin, Edward found only one thing: Hargreaves's old pocket watch. The hands were moving backward. Edward hired workers to rebury the coffin. But as they tried lifting it, one of them screamed, "Sir, there's someone inside." A faint breathing sound came from within the coffin. That night, Edward decided to burn the diary. As he lit the fire in the library, every book on the shelves suddenly opened on its own. Across every page, the same sentence appeared again and again. "You are forgetting. You are forgetting. You are forgetting." He tried to remember his favorite childhood toy, a small red car his father once gave him. But he couldn't. The phone rang again. An old friend from London spoke nervously. "Edward, are you all right? I heard your son died in that accident years ago." Edward dropped the phone. He had no son. And yet, suddenly he remembered. An 8-year-old boy named Thomas. A child who had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. Edward collapsed to his knees. The coffin was taking everything from him, one precious memory at a time. That night, when he entered the basement again, the coffin lid slowly opened by itself. Inside was a fresh pillow, and engraved upon it was his own name. Dr. Edward Harrington. Edward screamed as he tried to shut the coffin lid, but his fingers seemed frozen against the wood. From inside, soft, icy fingers touched his own. He pulled himself back with all his strength, slammed the basement door shut, and locked it before running upstairs. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. In a library, he searched through his father's old belongings and found a strange liquid metal cross that Sir Richard had brought back from an 1879 excavation mission. Engraved upon it were the words, "Remember or lose yourself." That night, Edward slept wearing the cross around his neck. When he woke the next morning, he could no longer remember his own name. He stood before the mirror. The face was his, but the eyes staring back felt unfamiliar. Trembling, he opened his father's diary and wrote, "My name is Edward Harrington." He kept writing it again and again, terrified he would forget once more. 2 hours later, he returned to the cemetery. Inside Mr. Hargreaves's cabin sat an old woman with wrinkled skin and pale eyes. "Are you Edward?" she asked softly. I think so." The woman smiled faintly. "Eleanor has chosen you. She no longer wishes to be alone. Your family has been tied to this curse for centuries. Your father spent his life trying to contain the coffin. But when you brought it home, you opened the door." Edward swallowed hard. "How do I stop it?" The woman handed him a torn, ancient letter. "You must return the coffin to the graveyard. But first, you must sacrifice your most precious memory, the thing you love most." When Edward returned to the manor, the house had changed completely. Every childhood photograph had vanished from the walls. His name could no longer be found in any of the family books. That night, he descended into the basement. The coffin looked different now, polished, clean, almost brand new. The lid stood open. Then a voice came from inside. His own voice. "Come, Edward, there is peace here. No memories, no pain, no loss." Edward raised the metal cross and placed it upon the coffin. Suddenly, the entire basement shook violently. "Knock, knock, knock!" The sound came from everywhere at once. Then a vision flashed before his eyes. Thomas, his son, the boy who had supposedly died 3 years ago, stood smiling before him. "Daddy, bring me back. I'm alone." Edward broke into tears. He knew it was a lie, yet his heart shattered anyway. "You're lying," he screamed. "You're feeding on my memories." Eleanor appeared before him. For the first time, her face was visible, beautiful, but unbearably sorrowful. "I once believed the same thing," she whispered, "when I wished for revenge against my husband. Every person who brings this coffin home sacrifices the thing they love most." Edward made his decision. "I will bury you again, even if I lose everything." But as he tried to lift the coffin, his strength failed him. The skin on his arms wrinkled rapidly, as though decades were passing in seconds. That night, when he looked into the mirror, his face appeared 60 years old, and beside his bed stood another coffin, a smaller one. Carved upon it were the words, "Thomas Harrington, age 8. The moment Edward saw the small coffin, his legs gave way beneath him. "Thomas, no, you can't take him from me." But his scream only echoed through the basement like mocking laughter. He ran outside toward the cemetery. Rain poured violently from the sky once more. Every grave in Blackthorn Cemetery had been opened. Bones and shattered remains lay scattered across the muddy ground. Mr. Hargreaves's corpse rested beside an open grave, his face twisted in a terror too horrible for death to erase. Edward grabbed a shovel and returned to the manor. It was 3 in the morning. He entered the basement again. The two coffins now stood facing one another, the large one and the small one. Eleanor stood fully revealed before them. Dressed in a white veil, she looked almost human now. Her empty eyes carried centuries of sorrow. "What do you want from me?" Edward asked weakly. "The thing you love most," Eleanor replied softly. "Your son Thomas did not die 3 years ago. You left him here, in this cemetery, to silence me. But the curse never forgave you. Now it wants him back." Edward's mind exploded with memory. Everything returned. 3 years earlier, he had discovered an ancient ritual claiming that the curse could be ended if someone sacrificed the person they loved most to the coffin. He had brought Thomas to the cemetery after drugging him unconscious. But the curse had rejected the sacrifice. Thomas died, and Edward forgot his crime. Now the curse had returned to collect its debt. Eleanor stepped closer. "You have 2 choices, Edward. First, lie inside the large coffin. I will consume the rest of your memories, and you will sleep forever without pain. Second, accept your son's small coffin. He will remain with you forever. But you will continue living as an old, broken man who no longer remembers who he is." Edward gripped the cross tightly. "And if I refuse?" Eleanor smiled sadly. Behind her, words appeared across the basement wall in blood. "You already accepted, long ago." Suddenly, the small coffin creaked open. Inside lay Thomas's body, fresh, untouched, as if he had died only moments ago. His eyes slowly opened. "Daddy, don't leave me alone." Edward collapsed in tears. Wherever his tears touched the ground, tiny hands began emerging from the soil. He was aging rapidly now. His skin sagged. His hair fell away in clumps. For one final moment, he remembered his father's warning. Never open the coffin. But now it was far too late. He stood between the two coffins. The large coffin called him toward eternal sleep. The small coffin begged for forgiveness. Knock, knock, knock. The sound had become his heartbeat. Voices echoed in Edward's ears. The basement spun around him while the two open coffins waited before him. He looked over 70 years old now. His hands trembled violently, and his vision blurred. Eleanor stood directly before him. For the first time, she seemed less like a monster and more like a lonely soul trapped in endless suffering. Choose, Edward. Time is running out. Slowly, Edward removed the cross from his neck and placed it on the ground. Then he walked toward the small coffin and looked down at Thomas. The innocent eyes of his son stared back at him. Edward gently touched the boy's face. Forgive-moi, son. I tried to save myself instead of saving you. A tear fell. At that exact moment, the entire basement shook violently. The small coffin slammed shut on its own and vanished. Eleanor looked shocked. Gathering the last strength in his failing body, Edward spoke. I will not offer you another sacrifice. Not my son, not myself. I will face the punishment for what I did, but I won't let you consume anyone else. He walked toward the large coffin and lay inside it without closing the lid. Then he picked up his father's shotgun, aimed at the wooden coffin walls, and fired. Boom! 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 As he kept shooting, he screamed. This curse ends tonight. I release you, Eleanor, and I release myself. The coffin began to crack apart. Black smoke burst from within it. Eleanor let out a horrifying scream, a scream that sounded centuries old. Long black strands of hair erupted from her body, twisting through the air before turning to ash. Edward opened his eyes one last time. Now he remembered everything. His mother's death, his son's sacrifice, his father's struggle, everything. And for the first time in years, he smiled. Now there is peace. The coffin lid slowly closed by itself. The next morning, the new caretaker of Blackthorn Cemetery discovered Harrington Manor completely abandoned. No lights, no voices, no sign of life. In the basement, only one coffin remained. Old, broken, empty, and written on the dirt beside it, as though scratched there with dying fingers, were the final words. Let the dead remain dead. Do not try to bring back what you have lost. The greatest curse is not losing memories, but hiding the sins you committed.